O great shining star, what would your happiness be, if not for those for whom you shine? The star is there for us to observe. Literally, it's aesthetics, it's poetry. Your happiness can be for those whom you shine. That's like saying that if I was alone on this world with nothing to observe me, then I would have a complete life. Give them not gifts, but yourself. Well, yeah, if you keep giving them money, then they'll never learn to rely on themselves for individual power. Whenever Nietzsche condemns pity, it's only in the sense that you give something because they've given up. If they just keep receiving and taking their whole lives, they're never going to give back to the world. And then you're like, yeah, you really have to be poor of soul to give alms. He's not saying you're poor of soul if you give to charity. He's saying if you only give charity and don't actually help them with their actual well-being, not just some beggar starving, but actual sick people in the mind, that's what he's talking about. I mean, you take him so seriously. When Nietzsche was comparing man to worm, and you're saying that little does Nietzsche know a genetic stock is like a battery that quickly runs out when it's not left in the wild. When domesticated, the battery runs out. I agree with you. And guess what? So does Nietzsche. He wasn't saying literally the worm is comparable to man. They're talking about morality. He is saying that man is a worm because all he does is take what he wants and then leaves. He never contributes anything. He's not talking about genetics, sir. He's talking about the contribution to this culture, this world. And a worm just tries to survive and forgets everything else. You say that we're not going to the next stage of man, and our batteries are done reproducing. Are you serious? Do you really think that this is the final stage? Are you that numb to think that we've already done everything we could and that this is the biological finale of all consciousness? Ego flash, ego flash. Dude, we have so much more to accomplish. Man is always evolving. I can't believe you said that. How could we possibly be at the final stage? And then once again, when he was comparing man to worm, you're like, if only he knew that our DNA is 50% compatible with the lowest bacteria. Once again, morally, sir, morally, we are compared to the worm, not genetically. Oh my God, you're a prime example of taking Nietzsche literally, literally, literally. Even when it's poetry and you think you're taking it metaphorically, you are so off. When Nietzsche said man is more ape than any ape, and then you said only crazy people would believe that, he's saying that once again, we're not contributing anything. We're just surviving. We have no clue as to our full potential. Just because, we've created a 9-to-5 job and, rocket science doesn't mean we've attained it, sir. Is this the only book you've read by him? One of the most profound lines, I think, in all of Nietzsche's philosophy was in Zarathustra, and you laughed at it. He said, to sin against the earth is now the most dreadful thing, not necessarily to a god, And it is. Why the fuck would you laugh at that? And then you sort of counter and saying, well, that's not any different from the modern day environmentalist movement. Duh, so why would you laugh at it? And your whole critique on the concept of wretched contentment. When he mentioned wretched contentment in that context, hint, hint, context, he means that the lower people, their form of contentment is wretched. He's not saying contentment is wretched. He's saying their form of contentment. And then you're like, some people think contentment is the point of life. Oh man, you cannot zoom out, can you? And then you're saying how the greatest thing for Plato is knowledge. And then Nietzsche says, the greatest experience you can have is the hour of the great contempt, when your happiness arouses your disgust. Once again, you're taking this a little too cut and paste, even if it's badly translated from German. This is not that hard to understand. It says, the greatest hour is when you realize that your whole life has just been wandering and your goals have been completely scattered. When your happiness arouses your disgust, he's saying that your current happiness arouses your disgust because you have so much more potential than your current state. So the greatest experience, I do believe, is when you're like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. I should be doing this and that. When he says the greatest hour is the hour when he hates his virtue. And then you're like, oh, you're going to attack virtue now? Yeah, he's going to attack their form of virtue, not the all-encompassing idea of virtue. You feel me? The great despisers are the despisers of modernity. It's good to be a great despiser, he says, because you have to despise the present in order to have any kind of new foundation for the future. Of course we have to despise. He says we only destroy in order to create. And we have to destroy this completely false representation of what life is supposed to be about and how we're supposed to treat people. Oscar Wilde once said, it is only the modern which is dated. So of course we're going to despise the present if we're going to make any kind of progress. Oh my God, you went into sacrifice like it was the fucking Aztec sacrifice to the sun gods. The shit is not literal sacrifice. He's talking about sacrificing yourself to the world and just giving up your ego. And when you mentioned that he had a very Buddhistic line, well, he read a lot of Buddhism. Ring ding ding. If you read The Antichrist, which I'm sure you haven't, or if you did, you utterly forgot it. He said in there that Buddhism is 100 times more realistic than Christianity. He was a Buddhist, and he wanted to incorporate his biblical scripture of Zarathustra into a more Eastern mindset and get rid of all this Western Aristotle, I'm an exterior of the world. He wants to go back to nature, just like Emerson. Read Emerson's first book. If you don't know about Emerson, you don't know about Nietzsche. And Emerson was a huge fan of the Vedas. There's a Nietzsche line, and you think he contradicts himself. The line reads, "I love him who loves his virtue." You read it as, "I love him who loves his virtue." Completely different thing. He's not attacking virtue. He's attacking the virtuous who think they are good. The virtuous, quote unquote, is a complete downfall of society because they think they've already attained the highest form of intellectual superiority. And then you're like, whatever, he had syphilis, he was dying. How rude. Not only is it completely irrelevant to the actual line, you're just saying, oh, that's a weird line, it's because he had syphilis. He didn't have syphilis in 1883, man. He got that later in 1886 or 7. Nietzsche says, "I love him who makes his virtue an addiction and his catastrophe." His catastrophe, the word catastrophe does not mean apocalyptic, go on a killing spree. If you make your virtue your catastrophe, you make it your reason to live dangerously. Living dangerously is a form of virtue to him. Why do you have to think the only form of dangerousness is violence and negativity? Thinking dangerously is the point of life. Thinking controversially, like, well, why do they have these as their backbone beliefs? If you wipe all of that off, other people are going to see it as a catastrophe, and you're going to see it as completely necessary. We must break in order to build. And then you're like, things won't be a catastrophe if you're addicted to your virtue. It'd make you a billionaire. This is the part where I just say, no comment. Yeah, what a confused philosopher, right? Yeah, what was he thinking? He only wants to completely turn over everything that has thought to be seen upright. Then I think that catastrophe needs a re-examination on your part. He's saying, your catastrophe is when you wake up and realize, like, let's throw all that shit away, let's start anew. It's a good thing. I agree with you that Nietzsche is about the philosopher kings, just like Plato. How is he wrong? I don't think democracy is right. Do you think 50 Hicks should vote over the one educated college student? Well, then you believe in philosopher kings, son. I love him who is abashed when the dice throws him something lucky. He's not talking about literally gambling. He's talking about gambling in life. He's talking about if you're too lucky, then you're never going to have to work hard. He's not talking about making money. You have totally misconstrued any actual metaphor. What the fuck does he have to do with gambling? Of course it's not really about a casino. And when Nietzsche said, even when you're wounded, your soul is deep. And you're like, yeah, so you don't turn into a crybaby. Man, you are really not mature enough for these writings. I don't know why you have 1,000 subscribers and why you're asking for money from people. You are one of the fakest people I've ever heard. Like, why would you criticize every line? Zarathustra is a classic, and you think your videos criticizing every line is going to discredit his actual words because you're misinterpreting his metaphors? Real casino. And yes, Nietzsche did talk of Rousseau. When Nietzsche said nature educated him too much, he meant that reality educated him too much and society was still blinded. He had skipped some steps and he had to retrace it when he actually talked to people. And yes, he read Rousseau. I wouldn't call him a fan. If you had his notes, Will to Power, and look in the index, you'll find Rousseau and all of his critiques on him. And when Nietzsche was talking about the great man, he said, one still quarrels, but one is soon reconciled, else it might spoil the digestion. And then you're like, what is digestion? That was when I knew you had no clue what emotional digestion is. If you knew of Nietzsche, if you really knew his struggle, you would know that history was a burden to him. He knew he had to overcome all of this history and that his destiny was not just for him, but for mankind. Digestion is emotional digestion. And you're talking about his stomach. It involves his stomach. He said himself he wanted a physiological philosopher in the future. In the sense that, like he said elsewhere in Zarathustra, your body has more wisdom than even your deepest theories. This is exactly what he means. And whenever he talks about digestion, it's emotional digestion. And Emerson and Nietzsche both talk about the main thing that a good reader needs is a good temperament. If you read too fast, you're not going to take the time. He said, whenever you approach my book, you better be comfortable. You should even have your shoes off. To sum it up, this is not a text that you can just nitpick every little thing that you take too literally. You're supposed to nitpick books, yes, but you have no conception of metaphor so far. I don't know why I should donate to you. Does that mean if this video proves you wrong in the end, I get to have all that money that people donated to you because they thought you were the smartest?